Bills Mafia. On today's Air Raid Hour pregame, we will be breaking down what we expect to see from the Bills tonight as they take on the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday Night Football. Injury updates, key matchups, our pregame superlatives are all coming up. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour pregame show brought to you by the Cover One Sports Network. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at The Bills Guys. Joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. Dave, this is the definition of a prime time matchup. You have two of probably the top three quarterbacks in the National Football League, two guys who are primed to once again be MVP candidates. You got primetime teams, you got primetime quarterbacks, you're in a primetime time slot. Everything about this game is absolutely star-studded.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most exciting game on the NFL slate since the very first game of the season this year, the Ravens-Chiefs game that opened the season on that Thursday night. But, you get the matchup between Mahomes and Lamar early in the season. Now you get the matchup between Josh Allen and Lamar here in week 4, early season game. Really kind of a game where you could kind of set the tone for the next several weeks of your season, depending on what happens here. Obviously, if it's a close game and the Bills don't come out on top, there will still be, I'm sure, positives to take away and vice versa, right? So, look, the Ravens, they're in a situation here where they're 1-2 coming into this game. They can fall to 1-3, potentially like sliding out of the playoff picture early in the season. So this is going to be a jacked up Ravens team playing at home. Lamar against Josh, it's got all of what you would want as an NFL fan in this game if you're just a casual observer, or if you're not. And it's going to be exciting tonight.
And it's crazy. Like I originally had in the show notes, like the 1-2 Ravens, their backs are against the wall. They're going to come out super aggressive and super fired up. And the Bills need to be prepared for that. But then I kind of stopped myself because I realized like that was the same exact talking point from the top of the show last week when we were facing the 0-2 Jaguars. Now, obviously, the Jaguars and the Ravens are two completely different football teams. One of these teams has a real quarterback. One of these teams is well coached. So that's a huge difference in the matchups this week. But at the same time, I think the Buffalo Bills start a really big 3-game road stretch where they have the Ravens, they have the Texans, and then they have the Jets. 2 of these 3 games are on primetime television. I think the Bills are pretty self-aware of the task at hand in front of them. And again, we're only 3 weeks into the season, so I could be completely ahead of myself here because the Buffalo Bills have gotten off to hot starts before. But the talking point in the middle of the season is always like, what happens to this football team? What happens to this football team? They're digging a hole for themselves that they have to get themselves out of at the end of the season. This team just seems like it's wired the right way as opposed to maybe some previous seasons. And I don't think you're going to see the peaks and valleys this year like you saw in previous seasons. And I think the Bills are fully prepared to face this Ravens team who are going to have their backs against the wall here.
Yeah, they are. And we're also big Broncos fans today. That 1:00 game between the Broncos and Jets, definitely want the Broncos to try to help us out there
Bo Nix, baby. Bo Nix, baby.
I mean, we think about how we came into this season talking about potentially the division being a 3-horse race between the Dolphins, Jets, and Bills. A lot of people love the Jets as kind of like a sleeper, deep playoff contending team. The Dolphins are always considered a threat, but the Dolphins going through their struggles right now without Tua don't really look like the same team. I think they're going to struggle again, even on Monday night against the Titans. But the Bills, if they can come out and take care of business today and the Jets find a way to fall to the Broncos, we're talking about a two-game lead in the division early on, and that Jets game coming up then could potentially be even more separation for the Bills. So you hope that like you said, there isn't that mid-season kind of clawing back into things situation for this Bills team. But, this is a good early season mile marker, right, for this team. It's like, yes, you've looked very dominant these first 3 games outside of maybe the first half of the Cardinals game, but otherwise looked fairly dominant. This presents a different challenge today because this is likely the toughest challenge you've had to face on both sides of the ball, I
Mhm.
would say, defensively and offensively. Outside of maybe Miami with Tua, fine, but this is going to be a big challenge for the Bills on the road.
Talking through some of the key points here, the weather, 70s and humid at kickoff. There is a slight chance for rain, and there will be some rain showers before the game tonight in Baltimore. It is a natural grass field, so it could be a little sloppy, but weather really shouldn't be much of a factor in this football game. It's the injuries that are probably more of the bigger story here in this game. The Ravens are dealing with some injuries. Jalen Armour Davis heads to IR. He is out for this game. Doubtful and unlikely to play starting left guard Andrew Voorhees and Michael Pierce, that one of their rotating nose tackles, and questionable is their starting center Tyler Linderbaum. So some big injuries for the Baltimore Ravens. Let's start with Michael Pierce because he's a big part of what is a rather dominant run defense that they have in Baltimore.
Yeah, big part. I mean, typically the starter there, next to Matabuke, and so we've got a situation where maybe this team that's allowed the fewest rushing yards in the league per game so far, the Baltimore Ravens only allowing 50 rushing yards per game on the season so far. Maybe there's a little crack in that armor tonight. Maybe the Bills go a
Mhm.
little contrarian and still try to establish that run game early on with James Cook and Ray Davis. We saw the Bills do this against the Eagles last year going into that game where the Eagles had the top rated run D and the Bills said, to hell with it. We're still going to try to run the ball. Uh, James Cook been getting, a good amount of carries per game so far this year. Maybe that Michael Pierce injury opens the door slightly for the Bills to kind of continue to
Mhm.
commit to that run game. And I don't think the efficiency is going to be great, but without Pierce, maybe the efficiency is a little bit better and just enough of an edge for the Bills to kind of still get their yards and their first downs through their run game.
Mhm. Despite being questionable, I fully expect Tyler Linderbaum to play, which is going to be huge for the Ravens. But Andrew Voorhees, their starting left guard, as I mentioned previously, is out. There's a couple options for the Baltimore Ravens here. They can insert either Ben Cleveland or Justin Jones into that left guard spot and keep their other 4 positions in Ronnie Stanley, Linderbaum, Falele, and Makare intact. Or they could move Patrick Makari from right tackle to right guard, and then left to right be Stanley, Makari, Linderbaum, Falele, and then the rookie Roger Rosengarten. There's a lot of youth on this Baltimore Ravens offensive line, regardless
Mhm.
of who they put where. And there's been a little bit of shuffling early on this season because of injuries, because of ineffective play. The Ravens offensive line has been one of their weaker spots, and the Buffalo Bills definitely need to attack this offensive line in this football game.
They do, and um it's weird to me that it has been such a weak link
Mhm.
of this Ravens team because on paper it should be a good offensive line. And they did get things going a bit last week against the Dallas Cowboys, especially on the ground. So you would think that the Ravens would look at this as another opportunity at home, Derrick Henry and Lamar, knowing the Bills have at times in the past, maybe not so much this year because they've been pretty good, been susceptible to some attack on the ground, especially in the screen game with guys like Justice Hill could be a factor tonight. But look, although they've underperformed maybe this year, even with the injury, whether it's Cleveland that comes in, it doesn't matter. I think this Ravens O line will perform tonight, and I do think they have performed under their capabilities so far this year. But I think a little momentum last week against Dallas should put them back on track to, I wouldn't. I'll put it this way. I wouldn't expect it's going to be a huge, huge advantage for the Bills
Mhm.
D line as much as maybe we think. I still think the Bills D line matches up as an advantage to this O line, but I don't think it's as much of an advantage as maybe it would seem through 3 games.
Looking at the Buffalo Bills injury report, Taron Johnson once again out, Terrell Bernard once again out, Tillen Grable headed to IR. So you'll see a couple of changes to the Buffalo Bills projected inactives this week. Obviously, Johnson and Bernard are out. Ryan Vandemark will be inserted into the lineup as the swing tackle with Grable on IR. That means that either SVPG or Will Clapp will be inactive this week, likely, based on last week's. And then it'll be really interesting to see. Ulofoshio and Mike Edwards were the two defensive inactives that they had last week because they wanted to carry 6 edge rushers in Javon Solomon and Casey Toohill. I wonder, maybe different week, different opponent, matchup based, if there's a chance that Ulofoshio or Mike Edwards find themselves in the lineup this week, and one of those edge rushers, probably more than likely Javon Solomon, makes their way to the inactive list.
Yeah, I don't mind that, to be honest, in a game like this where you're going to, like, a guy like Ulofoshio could come in handy sideline to sideline, making plays against Lamar Jackson potentially in the run game, right? And, he's not a guy that gets sacked a ton. If anything, it's usually from his own doing, right? From trying to make a play. And typically he gets away from those things. So it's like you wouldn't expect that Javon Solomon, right, would have like a great matchup here in the way that the Ravens play. So look, Ulofoshio maybe makes his season debut tonight. We'll see. I mean, Lamar, he's only been sacked 3 times so far this year. Only once last week against the Cowboys. So it's not like he's getting brought to the ground a lot. I do like the idea maybe of Ulofoshio playing tonight.
And to me, it's just quite frankly not even just like a matchup thing, because the chances of Ulofoshio really playing on defense aren't very high. It's just straight up a numbers thing and a security blanket type of thing, right? Because if you get into a situation where one of your linebackers gets hurt, we only had 4 active linebackers the last couple of weeks. Now you're down to 3. Are there situations in this game where you want to take Cam Lewis off the field because Cam Lewis isn't Taron Johnson and you want to stack 3 linebackers and be more traditional base? If so, you're probably going to want more than 4 linebackers just in case somebody gets hurt. You'll be down to your traditional 3. So I think there might actually legitimately be a chance for Ulofoshio and Solomon to sort of swap this week, just purely based on a numbers and quantity standpoint, because one guy gets hurt and all of a sudden it's like, oh, trying to tackle Derrick Henry, like trying to do those things that you need to do with only 3 linebackers gets a little bit concerning. But who knows? And it'll be interesting to see what decision the Buffalo Bills decide to make this evening. All right, now on to the matchups. And let's start with the Buffalo Bills offense versus the Baltimore Ravens defense. Dave, I'm going to start with you, right?
Yeah.
What does the DVOA tell us about this Baltimore Ravens defense? Let's start there, and then we can branch out our conversation from there.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting starting point of the conversation, right? Because through 3 games on raw statistics, the Ravens are last in the NFL in passing yards per game allowed and first in the NFL in rushing yards per game allowed. But then when you start to bring DVOA into the picture and you start to consider who the Ravens have played, they played the Chiefs week 1. The Raiders week 2 was kind of a weird game for them. Then they played Dallas week 3. Then the DVOA all of a sudden starts to even out a bit. 10th overall on defense, 13th against the pass, 9th against the rush. So what it tells you is that this Ravens pass D, who does have a good number of talented players, Kyle Hamilton, et cetera, who we know has struggled the first games, but they have good players. The DVOA is being kinder to them than the raw statistics would tell you. And I think what that tells us as, people talking about this game and as fans is you start to look and say 13th in passing DVOA versus a raw statistic of dead last. This pass D for the Ravens is better than advertised than what you would look at against the raw statistics. And it does make sense when you look at who they played against, the Chiefs in week 1 and the Cowboys in week 3, both with good passing offenses. That does make sense. They've had a very tough start to the schedule with that odd Raiders game in between. I think it tells you, don't sleep on this Ravens pass D. They were very good a year ago. They have talented players. They have a potential all-pro caliber player in Kyle Hamilton and a number of good corners. So I would say, look, pass D, you have to worry about them. And then on the rushing side, yes, they're first overall in raw statistics, 9th overall in DVOA. So they're saying, like, look, some of this is maybe a little bit more fabricated on the rushing D based on the teams they played. The Raiders, a very, very bad rushing team in week 2 overall this year. Zamir White and Alexander Madison have not gotten it going on the ground. So that takes a little bit away from them. And Dallas really didn't get it going either in week 3. That's the reason Raw statistically they're first, but still 9th overall in DVOA against the run. So it is a formidable task for the Bills against this Ravens defense. DVOA wise, the number one takeaway for me is don't sleep on that Ravens pass D.
Yeah, Brendan P comes with a great comment. He says the Ravens have also played from ahead the last 2 games, and obviously they blew it against the Raiders and they held on to beat the Cowboys. But when you're playing with such a large lead like they had in both of those games, you tend to play a lot of that sort of prevent, give the other team whatever they want underneath style of play, which is going to hurt the raw, box score data. But the DVOA takes that kind of stuff into account. And this is a defense, and we had this conversation on this show about Bobby Babich, right? All offseason, preach patience. Hey, it might take a couple of weeks for this thing to click. Now, the Buffalo Bills are playing out of their minds and playing well above expectations, especially given all those injuries. So kudos to Bobby Babich and this defense for what the Buffalo Bills have been able to do. But they have the same situation going on in Baltimore with a new defensive coordinator in Zach Orr. Like, 2 things can be true, or 2 things could possibly be true, right? Zach Orr could just suck and not be a good coordinator, and this Ravens defense is going to be mediocre throughout the entire season. That's 100% a possibility. We won't know that for 10, 11, 12 weeks. The other possibility is like the Ravens' new defensive coordinator and the new defensive players, they're just going through some growing pains, and they're just going through some communication issues, especially when they're playing with a lead and giving teams things underneath. And, at some point, maybe this week, maybe next week, maybe the week after, it's going to start clicking for them, and they're going to start to look like the Baltimore Ravens defense of old. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, again, as you mentioned, I don't really think there's anything you can take for granted. You have to treat this like the same exact Baltimore Ravens team that has played that lights out defense over the past couple of seasons. And looking at some of the SIS data, if you exclude garbage time, they have 5 DBs or more on the field 94% of the time. They are absolutely dependent on their front. Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, who's just becoming an absolute beast. We love Travis Jones in the pre-draft process.
Big fan.
Obviously, Michael Pierce being out hurts, but they are just so dependent on that front to make it work, and that front makes it work. Again, excluding garbage time, 59% usage of a light box for that Baltimore Ravens defense. That's 8th most in the NFL. They are 29th in the NFL at stacking the box. So don't expect any stacked boxes against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills offense today. 72% use of 2 deep shells. Again, playing with a lead in 2 of these last 3 games might have grew that number a little bit more than maybe the Ravens wanted to play it, but 72% use of 2 deep shell, 3rd most in the league, 29th in 1 high shell. So expect them to be dependent on the front to set the tone and dictate the line of scrimmage and to drop a bunch of dudes back. Like, that's what you're going to get from this Baltimore Ravens defense. And they got the dogs to be effective doing it.
They do. And it's going to look like they're going to be daring the Bills to run the ball. And they have been effective in light box run defense. So it's like, if you're the Bills, do you test that and see without Pierce if they're still going to be that effective in light box run defense? Maybe it's something the Bills try early on in the game. If they can crack a few decent runs, force the Ravens to maybe bring a few guys back down into the box. Maybe that opens things up for the Bills, but it's going to be quite a chess match on that front. But I do think the Bills need to test that, especially without Pierce, because no team has really been successful in doing that against the Ravens. But I don't think that means the Bills should try to shy away from it necessarily. However, based on what you're saying, it certainly feels like it's going to be another one of those games where the Bills are going to open up the passing attack, kind of like they did against Jacksonville. At least that's my gut feeling.
Yeah, this game is going to be a good test, too, to see how legit that Ravens run defense is, even though there is the caveat of probably no Michael Pierce tonight. Kansas City, they run the ball effectively, but it's not exactly like they run the ball a lot because they use the passing game as an extension of their running game. So you don't really get too big of a feel of how good the Ravens run defense is going against a team like Kansas City. Las Vegas is still trying to figure out life after Josh Jacobs. Not exactly the biggest challenge to the Baltimore Ravens in the running game, and they got out to a big lead before they blew it. And then Dallas decided they wanted to enter the 2024 season without any competent running backs, and they're not running the football at all. One of the more baffling decisions of the offseason, by the way. So, like, this is legitimately the first team that prioritizes running the football, that has effectively shown they can run the football, that the Baltimore Ravens are going to go up against. But based on the data coming in that we're seeing from this Baltimore Ravens run defense, I think I would expect a similar approach to last week, where
Yep.
it's pass centric for the Buffalo Bills, somewhere between 30 and 40 pass attempts from Josh Allen, using that passing game, guys like James Cook, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid as yak guys, as an extension of the run game. Get the ball in their hands, let them get you into second and short situations. The Bills were just, it was so fun to watch that last week. Just take the pressure off of Josh Allen, take the pressure off of even James Cook in the running game. Just get the ball into the hands of some of these guys like Shakir, Knox, Kincaid, Samuel, and get yourself 7-8 yards and set up second and short. It was so fun to watch, and I think you're going to see that again this week.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the opponents, again, the Ravens have played through the first 3 games. I mean, Travis Kelce at the tight end position really didn't do anything in week 1 against this Ravens D, but Rashee Rice, their number 1 receiver, had a good game against the Ravens. Devontae Adams had a huge game in week 2, and Brock Bowers, by the way, at the tight end position, good game in week 2 against this Ravens D. And then last week, CeeDee Lamb, not his best game, but Jake Ferguson, a big game against this Ravens defense. So Dalton Kincaid is the guy that comes to mind for me. Him and Shakir, I think, are the 2 guys that have to be the focus for the Bills offense. Opposing teams have had some success with their number 1 wide receivers, which at this point looks like it's Khalil Shakir for the Bills and their tight ends. So I expect Kincaid, maybe from a yardage standpoint, to have his best game of the year so far tonight as well.
Yeah, the Ravens have struggled, it seems like, with slot guys. Like CD operates from the slot. Rashee Rice operates from the slot. Brock Bowers, you mentioned, tight end, big slot. So it really seems like the Baltimore Ravens have struggled early on with those slot type of guys. So whether it's Kincaid or whether it's Khalil Shakir, maybe the expectation is one of those 2 dudes has a big game. Hopefully, maybe both of those dudes have a big
think they
game
both
for
need to.
for the Buffalo Bills. One of the things that, just in looking at this game, and I posted this on Twitter sort of as a preview of our pregame show here. To me, if you're the Buffalo Bills in approaching this game, and this is bringing a little bit of our defensive strategy into it as well, every drive legitimately matters in this football game. And I understand that every offensive possession matters in this football game. And I understand that sounds very simplistic, like, no duh, you want to try to score on every possession, right? But when you're playing a team like the Baltimore Ravens, and you play defense the way this Buffalo Bills team plays defense, punting and pinning deep is not going to be a win in this game.
Yeah.
Stacking field goals is not going to be a win in this game. We need to be aggressive on our 4th downs, just like we were early last week. The Baltimore Ravens, between Lamar and Derrick Henry, are going to be able to milk clock, control time of possession, and go on these long plotting drives. It's the goal of the defense to shut them down once they get into the red zone and force field goals. And then it's the job of our offense to respond to those field goals with touchdowns. Get a lead, force them into passing situations, and then go hunt for those big plays and turnovers.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I think that one of the things that you really need to make sure of if you're the Bills is, like, the Ravens are going to be aggressive on 4th down. We've seen this in past matchups with them. We've seen this from them on the season anyway. The Ravens will go for it on 4th downs, just like the Bills should and would go for it on 4th down. So I think you'll see a very aggressive approach. We're talking about the Ravens defense here against the Bills offense, but yeah, I think both teams are going to be aggressive on 4th downs, and you'll see a lot of go for it situations, I think, today from both teams.
Speaking of sort of the pass catchers, as we have had this conversation, we've already sort of pointed out Shakir and Kincaid. They should be the focal point probably of the intermediate passing game. But just speaking of all of our offensive weapons in general, like, what are you looking for today? This wide receiver by committee, this selfless approach that the Buffalo Bills seem to be taking. Whose week is it to step up this week? Or who's going to step up this week? Excuse me.
I mean, he had the touchdown last week, the yardage. He had the one big play kind of down the sideline, we know, on that deep crosser. I think it has to be Kincaid's week this week. And the reason I say that is because the matchup is right for it. And I also think that when you look across the other side of the field, I think there's going to be a little bit of the Ravens also trying to make sure their guy, Mark Andrews, has himself a game as well. tonight. He's been kind of waiting for that breakout game as well. So I think you could see the two tight ends on both sides being the guys that are relied on head to head. Really interesting matchup because you have both teams with two really good tight ends, Kincaid and Knox, and then Andrews and Likely on the other side. Those four guys, the tight end position, I think in this game, I'll say whoever's tight ends have better production in this game, I think wins the game.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And in my notes here, I just think that we should be funneling this offense today through Cook, Shakir, Kincaid. Like those got to be, I think, the big three. Get the ball into James Cook's hands, both in the running game, both in the passing game. Make sure he gets his 15 to 20 touches and he's involved. Make sure Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid are utilized out of the slot where the Baltimore Ravens are obviously weak, but Dawson Knox and Curtis Samuel, I think, can also have an effect on the game in the short to intermediate. They need to chip in there. And I really do think the Buffalo Bills should try to attack the Baltimore Ravens defense down the field. They've allowed some big plays this year down the field. So getting guys like MVS, Samuel, and Keon Coleman involved down the field, I think could also be a big part of being successful. Get Keon Coleman a couple of jump ball situations.
Yep.
Try to get a couple of play actions where you get Curtis Samuel and MVS streaking down the field and try to hit them on a big play. Make that a priority to mix that in along with making that passing game the extension of your running game.
Yeah.
All right. Now on to the Buffalo Bills defense versus this Baltimore Ravens offense. And I'm going to start with you here, Dave. What is the DVOA telling us about this Baltimore Ravens offense?
Yeah, look, it's good, right? We're talking about the number 1 and number 2 DVOA offenses in the league right now going up against each other. The Bills, the number 1 DVOA offense. The Ravens, the number 2 DVOA offense in the league. Third in the pass, first in the rush. I don't think that should come as a real surprise to anybody that the Ravens are first in the NFL in rushing DVOA. They have the number 1 offense yards per game in the NFL DVOA. So that kind of lines up. They're averaging 430 yards per game. They're one of only 2 teams averaging over 200 rushing yards per game. The Packers, shockingly, the other, and they're like almost 40 yards above the next closest team, the Eagles, who are in third. So the DVOA here is telling us that the raw statistics and the advanced statistics are kind of lining up, right, with the way this team has performed on offense. Great rushing team, as we've seen, highlighted by that huge game that Henry and Lamar had last week against the Cowboys. And the DVOA says, look, these were some of these matchups weren't the best matchups. They've overcome some of the matchups. I don't necessarily think that the Raiders were something that will help their DVOA, but against the Dallas Cowboys, who had struggled the first couple games and then very much struggled against the Ravens in week 3, then turn around and shut the Giants down in week 4. And then the Chiefs obviously have had a pretty good success at defending the run as well. This is basically telling you this team is legit. The advanced analytics line up with the raw statistics. This team can throw, even though it might not seem like they're a big pass-heavy team. Zay Flowers has been involved. Isaiah Likely's been involved, and they haven't even gotten Mark Andrews going yet. Justice Hill out of the backfield, and then obviously we know they can run it. The threat this year and what the Ravens envisioned this year was the dual threat of you have to pick your poison, Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, and that has led to them being first in the NFL in rushing DVOA so far through 3 games. So legitimately one of the better offenses, if not the best rushing offense. It is the best rushing offense analytically so far this year. A big test for this Bills defense.
Yeah, I think the biggest test today is the combination of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry in the run game. Specifically, I think probably the biggest talking point heading into this game, and this is the biggest talking point heading into every Bills-Ravens game, stopping the run out of the nickel, because obviously we know for the Buffalo Bills, nickel is base. And the one big difference this week is there's no Taron Johnson. So is nickel still base? I think so, because Cam Lewis has shown that he's been a competent replacement for Taron Johnson, and he's shown that he has a nose for the football in the running game. But now the highlight and the focus is no longer on Taron Johnson. It's going to be on Cam Lewis. No longer is the highlight and the focus going to be on Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, and Tremaine Edmonds. It's going to be on Balin Spector and Dorian Williams. Like Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, plus the other defensive tackles, they need to win at the line of scrimmage, and they need to force Derrick Henry to go east-west. That's how you stop Derrick Henry. But then once they do their job, and hopefully they do their job, my expectation is they do their job, then it's on Balin Spector, Dorian Williams, and Cam Lewis to do their jobs, closing in from the second level and finishing. You got to make Derrick Henry bounce to the outside. You can't let him get ahead of steam and go north-south.
You can't. And the Bills, like you said, they have to be really good tackling today, and they have to have, like, it sounds simplistic, but the team defense and the team tackling and the rallying to the ball and helping guys out, like, it's going to take 1, 2, 3 guys to bring Derrick Henry down. And then conversely, when Lamar's running, you have to make him also, like, you have to have him contained on either side as well. And you cannot let Lamar get loose. The one thing that I worry about with Lamar is him stepping up in the pocket and running through the middle of the defense. Spector and Williams are going to need to have their head on a swivel, because Lamar can make you look silly when stepping up and running up through a collapsing pocket. That is the thing that worries me the most, I would say, even more so than Derrick Henry, because I think in some regards, right, like, you're going to expect Derrick Henry to kind of maybe get his, right? But what you got to do is you got to limit the big plays from Lamar on the ground and force the Ravens to get into some third and long situations. And the way you do that is you can't let Lamar get these easy first downs, these cheap rushing yards. He's going to have some plays. I fully expect that, but you got to try to limit it as much as you can.
Jessica Tennis comes in with a great comment. She says, do the Bills go with Cole Bishop when the Bills go into dime today? That's an interesting perspective, right? Do the Buffalo Bills, finally utilize Cole Bishop? Obviously, he dealt with that injury through training camp, has really slowed down his progress in terms of getting onto the football field. But Cole Bishop has been really effective at the line of scrimmage, or was really effective at the line of scrimmage in college. Despite the fact that he has those shorter arms, he really had a nose for playing at the line of scrimmage and covering tight ends and doing things in the run game and blitzing the quarterback. Those are all things that he did effectively at the University of Utah. So do the Buffalo Bills decide to weaponize a guy like Cole Bishop today? That's a really interesting point. Maybe that's one of the tricks that they have up their sleeves, a new wrinkle that they're going to try to throw at this Baltimore Ravens defense. But you mentioned how Lamar scares you more. Just the zone reads and the play action stuff that they can do with Lamar and Derrick Henry. That's the basis of their offense. And this is an offense that they don't take deep shots. This season on deep shots, they are 1 of 8 for 38 yards on the season, on attempts 20 plus yards in the air. Like, they just don't do it. Lamar Jackson's average depth of target, 8.2 yards versus Kansas City, 9.8 versus Las Vegas, and then a whopping 3.8 yards versus the Dallas Cowboys. This is an offense that Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson run. You get yak from guys like Zay Flowers and Justice Hill, and you work the middle of the field with guys like Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. That is the focus of this offense. They have a shaky offensive line, so they're going to look to get the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands quickly. It's the job of the Bills offense to build a lead so that the Buffalo Bills can just take the middle of the football field away and force Lamar Jackson to throw to the boundaries, because that has been proven to be the way to shut Lamar down. He cannot throw to the boundaries, or at least he cannot throw to the boundaries consistently. When you ask him to play quarterback in that way, take the middle of the field away, take all the easy extension of the run game with those little simple dump off passes, when you force him to throw outside the hashes consistently, he has proven to be an ineffective quarterback. And that's what the Buffalo Bills have to do today. But it's very difficult.
Yes.
To force them to do that.
Easier said than done. Like, teams have been trying to do that, and like they haven't been successful, right? I mean,
in the playoffs they are, but in the regular season,
I think this is going to be a Mark Andrews type of breakout game for those fantasy people with Mark Andrews. I think you're going to see a good game from him tonight. The Bills, I mean, they allowed a touchdown to Brenton Strange last week. I know it was kind of in garbage time. They let Jonnu Smith have a decent day. He's probably best game of the season, week 2. This is going to be a tall order for the Bills to stop Likely and Andrews over the middle of the field. And I also wouldn't discount Justice Hill getting involved a little bit in the passing game as well. I mean, he's a role player for them, but he's someone that the Bills just can't. It can't be an afterthought for him when he's on the field, because especially in week 1, he did damage against the Chiefs in week 1 out of the backfield. He's been a little quieter these last 2 games, but they haven't needed him as much in these last 2 games. So he is a guy, like, you want to kind of draw some parallels to that week 1 game against the Chiefs. He's a guy I would be watching out for coming out of the backfield.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Lamar Jackson's passing chart, these are some of the things that you need to be aware of. Like you just mentioned Justice Hill. To the short right, Lamar Jackson is 14 of 14 on the season. They've only attempted 4 attempts short left, but his 14 of 14 to short right has gone for 164 yards. And then the intermediate center of the field, he's 10 of 12 for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns. You got to take the dump offs away. You got to take the middle of the field away. You got to force that defense to the boundaries. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for our pregame superlatives. As always, every week we take the back half of the show to give out some pregame superlatives, make some pregame predictions, have a little fun. And as always, we start with our Take Me Higher player of the game. All right, Dave, who is your player? Take Me Higher player of the game. This is the guy, for those that don't know, that is not Josh Allen. We're not allowed to pick Josh Allen. The one player, the one star player on the Buffalo Bills that needs to step up their game in order for the Buffalo Bills to get a win versus the Baltimore Ravens today.
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of hinting at it all show, and it's now the time for Dalton Kincaid to have his big breakout game of the season. I know he scored last week, had the big play down the sideline, but he is going to be the guy to take the Bills higher today. The last 2 opponents, Brock Bowers has had his way with the Ravens defense. Jake Ferguson, just under 100 yards last week. I think 95 yards for him against this Ravens defense. It is time for Kincaid to have his signature game thus far for this season. I think you see a game where Kincaid maybe approaches double-digit targets in this game, has his best yardage of the season, and really probably needs to find the end zone as well. It's time for Dalton Kincaid to break out and take this team higher.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I was so dead set on changing my Take Me Higher this week to Khalil Shakir or to Dalton Kincaid, just because of everything that we've sort of talked about when we talked about the Buffalo Bills offense and sort of some of the weaknesses of this Baltimore Ravens defense. But the Buffalo Bills are 3-0, and for 3 straight weeks, I have picked James Cook. So I can't jinx it. I can't jinx it. So once again, my Take Me Higher player of the game is James Cook. My prediction is once again 150 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. Again, this is not my most like pounding my chest for this week, but I just feel like I have to do it for the sake of not jinxing it. But just the fact remains simple. Like this offense should be funneled between James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, and Khalil Shakir. If there are anyone who's going to get the biggest target share, the biggest workload, it should be those 3. And then the other pieces are sort of the auxiliary pieces. So even though we're playing this selfless football, right, where everybody eats, James Cook, Khalil Shakir, and Dalton Kincaid should be eating just a little bit more. So that is my Take Me Higher player of the game. We've got a couple of people coming in. Dante Jenkins is mad that he can't pick Josh Allen. Brendan P, came in and said Groot is going to really have to set the edge this week. Josh Clark said Ed Oliver. Dominating the lines of scrimmage is going to be really important to beat a team like the Baltimore Ravens. Dante Jenkins, save Dawson Knox for your wild card, man. Jessica Tennis says Dorian Williams. Let's save that for our wild cards. And then Rick A comes in and he says Gregory Rousseau as well. All right, now on to our wild card player of the game. All right, so our wild card player of the game every week is one player. This is not a superstar player, right? This is not one of the cornerstone players. This is a auxiliary player on this Buffalo Bills team. What auxiliary player, Dave, needs to step up? And a good example, I think, would be Dawson Knox or Dorian Williams. What type of auxiliary player needs to step up this week and be the wild card for the Buffalo Bills to get a victory against the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, I mean, Dawson Knox is a great one. I mentioned the team that has the better tight end game, I would say. Like both teams have 2 good tight ends is gonna maybe win this game. But I'll go a little bit more outside the box. I think Ray Davis is a wild card today. like the efficiency numbers don't look great for him if you just look at the raw statistics, because he's come in some situations where the Bills have been just kind of pounding the rock to salt away some games. He did get his first touchdown last week, which was nice to see. But in earlier in games when he's had a chance, he's ripped off some runs. I think stylistically he can do some damage against this Ravens front if given the opportunity. So if the Bills do want to kind of exert their will and say, you know what, to hell with this Ravens rush D, we know they've been good, but we're going to give you a heavy dose of James Cook and the ground game. I think Ray Davis can play a part in that. I'm not saying he's going to have like 10 carries or anything like that, but I could see him having like 4 to 5 touches in this game for 20 to 30 yards, being efficient with those touches, maybe making a key reception. He's had at least one catch in every game so far. So maybe a key reception for Ray Davis at some point this game as a wild card pick.
Yeah, I had this conversation with myself last week on the post game show, but I know that this whole selfless approach this year has sort of taken over the Buffalo Bills, receiving room and offense. But there was like a conversation they had when talking to James Cook, and James Cook was like, "Hey, Josh, can you stop poaching my touchdowns?" And it seems like there is more of an emphasis on using James Cook in the red zone this year. And I'm not going to lie to you, like, I'm just not the biggest fan of that. I would really like to see Ray Davis get some more red zone touches, especially on the goal line. I would like to see, that's like the one spot where, unless you're going to be passing the football, and again, you don't want to get too predictable, I really don't want to see James Cook running the ball from the 1 yard line. That's just,
I'm with you on that.
That's not for Ray Davis.
I'm with you.
But we got a couple of wild cards coming in here. Roy Collins says MVS, a ton of love for guys like Dorian Williams and Valen Spector. One that I really like here from Ralph Wilson Sr., he says Codrington, the return man, right?
He's been good.
On the flip side, if the Ravens might have a wild card player this game, a little Deontay Hardy revenge game, could be in the works here. So got to make sure, can't let Deontay Hardy get his revenge for those Baltimore Ravens. But I cheated a little bit here. I went with 3 guys for my wild card player of the game, and it sort of summarizes what the people in the chat here said. Cam Lewis, Valen Spector, Dorian Williams. Like, those to me are my 3 wild card players of the game. I think Oliver, I think Jones, they're going to do their job up front. Rousseau, that defensive line, they're going to do their job up front. We need these guys at the second level cleaning up. You need to have a plan to spy Lamar. You need to have a plan to take Derrick Henry down quickly, make him go, force him go east-west. And that plan depends heavily on 3 guys who are not exactly star players in Cam Lewis, Valen Spector, and Dorian Williams. So those 3 guys will be huge for the Buffalo Bills today. All right, now on to our Respect You player of the game. All right, our Respect You player of the game. This is one opponent from the Baltimore Ravens that the Buffalo Bills need to be aware of. And they need to make sure that they are focusing on this guy and taking this guy out in order to be successful in this football game. Who is your Respect You player of the game for the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, this is a good one. It's easy to say Derrick Henry and Lamar. I'm not going to go that route. I'm going with the guy I've been kind of hinting at as well for the Ravens throughout the show, and that's Mark Andrews. I think looking for his breakout game as well, like Dalton Kincaid is, even more so than Dalton Kincaid. Mark Andrews has been kind of an afterthought for this Ravens team so far this year. He's a super humble guy. He's just biding his time. You hear the way he talks about, he knows his time will come. This is a matchup, I think, that the Ravens are going to try to get Mark Andrews involved. The Bills really got to be aware of him and Isaiah Likely. I think just like, the Ravens have to be aware of Kincaid and Knox. I will say Mark Andrews tonight. He's looking for that big breakout game so far of 2024. I think the Ravens in the passing game over the middle of the field, like you said, testing Dorian Williams, testing Valen Spector, will try to get Mark Andrews involved. Have to respect Mark Andrews.
Roy Collins comes in. He says Kyle Hamilton. I think that's a good one. I went with the defensive side of the ball as well, because I think Lamar and Derrick Henry are givens. Obviously, Zay Flowers is pretty big. Charles G says Adafio away off the edge. He's been very good. Kyle Van Noy as a pass rush specialist has been very good for them. But Kyle Hamilton, Adafio away, Kyle Van Noy, they are able to operate the way they do because of these 2 guys. And these 2 guys are my Respect You player of the games. And that's Justin Matabuke and Travis Jones. Like, they control the line of scrimmage on that defense. They allow everyone else to operate the way that they operate. You have to account for the way that those 2 guys can dictate a game, because when 2 dudes can control the line of scrimmage, that allows the other 9 dudes to absolutely fly around and do whatever it is that they need to do. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, you need to find a way to minimize the impact of a Justin Madubuike. Find the way to minimize the impact of a Travis Jones in this football game. All right, now we are on to our hottest takes from this week's game. All right, Dave, we are now having a fire sale, and we are given our hottest takes from this week's game. Dave, what's the spiciest take you got heading into this game? Getting a little risky here.
Yeah, I think this game's going to be tight. I don't know which team it's going to be, but there will be either a special teams or defensive touchdown in this game. It just feels like something like that is going to maybe be the difference even in the outcome of the game. A special teams or defensive touchdown from one of these two teams will happen in tonight's game. It will be a huge momentum gainer and killer for one team, gainer for one and killer for the other. Could be the difference in the game. I think we know Harbaugh's got that special teams background. Deontay Hardy, could he possibly break one? Codrington, could he possibly break one on special teams? And then defensively, these teams have been really good at taking the ball away. Both of them so far this year. The Bills better than the Ravens so far in the takeaway department, but don't sleep again on this Ravens pass D. I think has been maybe underperforming is not the word, but they ready for their moment as well. So I'll say there will be either a defensive or special teams touchdown in this game.
Brendan P comes in and says Lamar will account for 3 turnovers today. One can hope. If the Buffalo Bills lose and Lamar turns the ball over three times, something went horribly, horribly wrong for the Buffalo Bills. My hot take, and I've been very mild with my hot takes the last couple of weeks, so I decided to spice it up a little this week. One of 2 players, either Khalil Shakir or Dalton Kincaid, will have 10-plus targets, 100-plus yards, and a touchdown. I think that there will be an alpha receiver this week. Which one it is, I don't know, but I expect a big game from one of those 2 guys, like a box score statistic, like boom, like sticks out type of game from either Khalil Shakir or Dalton Kincaid. Charles G comes in and says Bass-O-Matic returns with 2 makes from over 50 yards. I hope the Buffalo Bills don't have to kick any field goals today. Really, I'm team touchdown, as I sort of hinted at.
If those 2 makes are right before the half and maybe at the end of the game.
There we go. Roy Collins says big man touchdown for the Buffalo Bills tonight. All right, now it's time for us to sort of paint a picture, go back to the future with our pre-game prediction. All right, Dave, paint a picture for us. What's this game going to look like?
Yeah, I think that this will be maybe the first time all year, maybe outside of the first half of the Cardinals game, that the Bills maybe come out a little bit jittery on offense to start the game. I think we'll try to run the ball a little bit early and maybe run into some brick walls. I think it's a little bit of a puncher's battle here in the first quarter or 2. I actually think maybe it'll be a little bit lower scoring than people are going to think. I think you'll see a couple touchdowns in the first half, but I do think it's going to be a little bit lower scoring than people think. There's going to be some tough decisions to make on 4th downs in this game. I do think ultimately that the Bills, with the efficiency they've had and their ability to use motion, get multiple guys involved, I think have the slight advantage efficiency-wise in the passing game. The Ravens will have a decent day running the ball, but I think at the end of the day, the Bills do find a way to win this game. I think it will be close. I think it's within a touchdown, maybe even within a field goal at the end. I'll say it's within a field goal. The Bills win this one. I'll say 23-20.
All right. I think the Buffalo Bills, and I talked about this at the top of the show, I think the game plan for the Buffalo Bills today is going to be to sort of allow the Baltimore Ravens to do what they want in the underneath and to just focus on putting the clamps down once they get to the red zone. Once that field is shortened, put the clamps down and force field goals. So I do think the Baltimore Ravens are probably going to dominate time of possession in this football game, and you're going to count on your offense to be efficient and to match those Baltimore Ravens field goals with offensive touchdowns from the Buffalo Bills. So I think the Ravens are going to clean up in total yards, but I think the Buffalo Bills are going to put the clamps down in the red zone. My prediction is Bills 27, Ravens 19. The Ravens will get the ball at the end of the game and have to march the field, and score a touchdown and get a 2-point conversion to tie the game. So it will be a little anxiety inducing that way, but I think the Buffalo Bills will ultimately get that stop on the final possession of the game. In my prediction, I have each team scoring 5 times, but the Baltimore Ravens score 1 touchdown and 4 field goals, whereas the Buffalo Bills score 3 touchdowns and 2 field goals. And I think that will be the difference in this football game. I think one team will kick field goals, and I think one team will score touchdowns, hopefully. And the Buffalo Bills come out on top.
How many
27-19.
How many combined 4th down attempts do we see from both teams? Maybe like 8 plus.
I think it's going to be pretty high. I think you're going to see 2 very, very aggressive football teams this evening, but that would be an interesting over and under to bet on.
I'll say 8 plus. I'll say 8 plus combined 4th down attempts from both teams.
Got some other predictions coming in. Brendan P says 30-24, Bills win. Marcus Alexander says 35-17, Bills win. Charles G says 23-20, Bills on a Bass walk-off. The anxiety that I will be feeling if that is the case in this football game will be second to none. Jessica Tennis comes in and says 31-17. Ralph Wilson Sr. says 31-28. And then Marcus Alexander comes in and corrects his prediction, says 35-17. The Ravens get destroyed. So a lot of interesting predictions from the chat. Thank you guys so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon if you're watching on demand here. But don't forget, the Cover One postgame show is live tonight following the game. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. to give our own biggest takeaways from this game. If you guys could do us a favor before you head out of here this morning, number 1, smash that like button, helps us with the algorithm. And number 2, if you think there's anyone out there who would enjoy this pregame conversation, click that little share button, copy, paste the link, text it to them, email it to them, let them know about everything we got going on here at Cover One at the Air Raid Hour. We would really appreciate that word of mouth as well. Dave, any final thoughts before we head out of here this afternoon or this morning?
Certainly going to be an anxiety-filled day. I talked about this with Joe when I guessed on Under Review on Tuesday, waiting all day for Sunday night. Never more true than today. Going to be a lot of anxiety. I'm going to try to keep myself busy throughout the day, but I'm going to be a nervous wreck today. It's definitely the biggest game so far of the year.
Yeah, I've got a Costco trip planned today. I'm going to be taking the kid to the in-laws to watch the Cardinals game to get my mind off of football while my wife goes.
Should be a good game, by the way. Cardinals Commanders. That should be fun.
My wife goes to get a mani-pedi. I get to watch a little Kyler Murray and Jaden Daniels while the mother-in-law watches the baby, so I can focus solely on football. But I gotta keep my mind off of this Bills Ravens. And what I love about living on the West Coast is like I'm gonna watch this full game and then go to bed by like 9 p.m. tonight. It's gonna be awesome. So thank you guys so much for joining us this morning / afternoon, depending on when you are watching. Get your blue light, Picasso's pizza and wings ready for 7 hours of commercial-free football, and then prepare yourself for the anxiety that is Buffalo Bills football. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!